Ukrainians have remained pretty calm throughout this whole thing. So what does it mean to now see this national state of emergency declared?
Yes, that's right. It doesn't seem to quite fit with the public message of it's all calm and there's nothing to see here. I think there is a growing sense of concern, not just within the Ukrainian government, but within the Ukrainian people. And that makes sense, right? I mean, they've been put under incredible pressure. How much of it is real, we'll have to wait and see. But the announcements that have come out of the Kremlin, the moves to support these breakaway separatist republics, all, of course, tap into the psyche of the nation. And the president and the government can't just sit to one side. So we know that there was this military briefing that took place overnight with President Zelensky and leading lawmakers, in which they laid out that the Russians could start to advance on potentially a couple of major cities in the east of the country, move out of that area, also talking about the possibility of a threat on Kiev. And then we've seen the National Security Council being convened, this now state of emergency, which is going to last for 30 days. It has to be ratified by the Parliament, which is going to take place around 5 p.m. local this afternoon, around 10 a.m. your time. That's likely to just go ahead. What it actually means is this isn't a war footing as such. It's not martial law, but it's a step in that direction. It basically gives power to the regions to protect infrastructure, to deploy security personnel to protect key sites like water, electricity stations, those kinds of things. Also allows to control the flow of traffic, potentially a curfew, and we're now seeing some military reservists who have combat experience, as many as 36,000 being called up. So yes, I think this is an acknowledgement of the gravity of the situation. I don't think the Ukrainian government is playing it down. They're certainly preparing for the worst while still hoping for the best.
And James, Russian government officials are downplaying the impact of these new economic sanctions, saying that they've been, quote, sanction-proofing the economy there for months in preparation. Is this just tough talk, or can they really shrug these sanctions off?
Well, with Vladimir Putin, it's always tough talk, Diane, so you can never really know. I mean, it's a tough balancing act, isn't it? Because if the sanctions aren't tough enough, then Putin could just get on with it. But if they're sort of effective and they actually do some damage, one kind of worries that that's just kind of spur him on. The Russian government have been talking about future-proofing the Russian economy to these sorts of sanctions. There was talk earlier, I think a couple of months ago, about how Russian cheese was so good and that you wouldn't need any more French cheese. You can't run an economy on cheese. Here, it's all about energy, oil and gas, and that is why that particular sanction that the Germans came out with about suspending the certification for Nord Stream 2, not running yet, that gas pipe, but the plan is that it will, and if that is followed through on, that is a huge hit for the Russian economy. Oil and gas, obviously a big motor for the economy here. And you know, the Russians know they can hold, especially Europe, ransom because of our energy needs in Europe. Huge energy crisis going across the continent, and I know gas prices in the United States are rising too. And that is why we've heard Medvedev, a former president here, you might remember, he swapped places with Vladimir Putin a few years ago when he became Prime Minister and Medvedev was president. He has been sort of taunting Europeans, saying very soon you're spending $2,000 on gas. So they know, that's why they wage wars in the winter. They know this is how they can hold Europe ransom. But I don't think they really counted on Europe being quite so united against them this time round. Diane?
And Mary Alice, this is just the first wave of sanctions from the U.S. So what further steps could the Biden administration take if things escalate?
Yeah, Diane, the White House saying that this was the beginning of an invasion and so the beginning of the United States response. They are saying that if President Putin was to ratchet up military force, sort of advance his forces even more, that they would advance sanctions. They're still threatening things like sanctioning Putin himself, import-export sanctions to actually limit what American technologies, American manufactured goods Russia would be able to bring into its country. That's a pretty big threat. Obviously, Putin really likes advancing his own military, his own defense systems that rely actually heavily on technology made elsewhere in the world. And there's also some talk about whether they could sanction even more Russian banks. They are trying to keep these very targeted. They're saying they want to make sure that they're not limiting Russia's ability, like James was just talking about, to still export gas and oil. It's possible that Russia decides to do that anyway, starts turning off the spigot. But for now, the United States is trying to not have sanctions sort of get at that. And we've had so much conversation here in Washington yesterday about about what constitutes an invasion, what should trigger more and more sanctions. I think at this point, we're going to watch Washington really take cues from Ukraine, from Kyiv. They're going to see when Ukraine starts responding and when Ukraine starts asking for more help.
And Ian, these breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine were already under control of Russian-backed separatists. They've seen plenty of fighting over the last few years. So what's the impact there from the developments over the last few days?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing is a ramping up of these numbers of incidents. The Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, has basically been in charge of a monitoring mission since this ceasefire was introduced in 2015 and the Minsk Accords, or the second Minsk Accords, were signed. But of course, it's always been an imperfect ceasefire. On average, in 2021, there were around 300 ceasefire breaches a day. Well, yesterday, on February the 22nd, there were 2,000. And so there's a significant number of artillery explosions taking place, conflict on that front line between Ukrainian forces and these Russian-supported rebels, these separatists. And I think most worrying, really, is the rhetoric that's coming from there. Because the feeling was that a lot of the claims that were being made, some of which was, grossly inaccurate, were basically to try and to persuade Russia and soften up Russian opinion for supporting the breakaway region, supporting their claim for independence. Well, that's already happened, and yet we're still seeing those claims coming forward of alleged attacks by the Ukrainians, saying that the Ukrainian military is planning an all-out assault against these separatist areas, again, without any evidence. But what matters is who is the audience. The audience is the people within those two breakaway areas, but also Russian domestic public opinion. And if that is an indication of trying to soften opinion for further military action, then we shouldn't expect just Russian tanks and armoured personnel carriers, as has already been reported, rolling into the Donetsk and Luhansk regions in the east of the country, but actually pushing further into the Donbass. And actually, when Vladimir Putin spoke yesterday, crucially, he didn't just recognise the existing borders of the territory that's held by the Russian-backed separatists, which is about 30% of the Donbass. He recognised the entire region, in other words, the other 70% that is currently occupied or currently held by Ukrainian government forces, and that is deeply worrying. It's an indication that we're not just going to see those troops move in and consolidate territory already held, that this is the start of a much greater military offensive.
All right, Mary Alice Parks, James Longman, and Ian Pannell, thank you all.